Welcome everybody to our webinar on tongue groove and shadow rails and angled doorbacks or shark nose. We're going to start with tongue groove. It is the most information dense part of the webinar. I'm going to cover it as clearly as I can. It can be very difficult to explain. Once you get your head around how it works, it makes sense. It's just very difficult to explain. So I've made some pictures, which I'll try and use along the way. I'm not going to go into every little detail of tongue groove like everything you're going to find with CabMaster. You can just keep changing settings, keep doing different things. There is no correct way to do something. The idea is to think outside the box and think, how can I do this to the application that I need? So tongue groove is a construction method. It's the same as screw or dowel or cam, except it is a mortise and tenon style joinery. To apply tongue and groove, you go to drawing properties, machining general, and we change these all to tongue. Now this will change it at a drawing level. If you want to change this, make it a permanent setting, so it's not just one drawing, but all your future drawings, file, prepare, catalog properties. It'll look just like the drawing properties, but it will be pink. And when you close down CabMaster, it will ask if you want to save the catalog. If you want to apply to one cabinet in the drawing, for a standard cabinet, we'll open that up. We'll go to cabinet machining, then machining here, untick default construction, and select tongue from the drop-down list. If you want to do that for universals, you go to cabinet machining, and then you go through your back, rails, ends, all these parts, and change construct end, top, bottom, all of it to tongue. As you can see, I've done here. I've done it with ends, top, bottom, etc., etc. So what are the options for tongue and groove? So if we go to drawing properties and then machine tongue, and we have settings here. So I'm going to start with a single line toolpath. I do have a handy little picture here. There's two ways to do grooves. So there's single line groove and there's a rectangle groove. If you select single line, it will just put a single line on that part. You use an engrave strategy and your tool will just follow that path. Rectangle groove, you would use a internal offset or an island or patch fill, and it will go around the inside of the rectangle. I'll minimize that. The advantage of a single line toolpath for grooves, it's much faster to machine because obviously it's just going from one end of the line to the other. It's not going up and back. The most important thing with a single line groove is that the groove width will be exactly the same as the diameter of the tool that's doing it. So that means the diameter or the width of the groove has to match a tool that's in your machine. That's where you set the diameter. If you're using a single line toolpath, you'll notice that it removes the option to set the groove width. So obviously then your rectangle, you have the option to have a groove width that isn't the same as one of your tool diameters. As long as the tool that's cutting it is narrower than the width of your groove, it will be fine. If it's exactly the same width, you might as well just use single line groove because EasyNest would see that and go, my 10mm tool isn't going to fit into a groove that's 10mm wide, and it won't apply the strategy. Now you can include screw holes, and you can set an offset. So a positive offset will move the screw hole away from the center line of the adjoining part. A negative offset would then move it closer to the edge. Next, we're going to talk about tongue. So include tongue by default with a fresh installer CabMaster is on. If I untick that, what it will do is it will not machine the tongue to be a different thickness to the material thickness. And I do somewhere here have a picture of, yeah. So when into include tongue is unticked, the tongue will be the same thickness as the material. Conversely, when it's ticked, it will machine the tongue to be a separate thickness to the material of your carcass. Obviously, everything works off the machined face, so you can't have screw holes in this side, but then the tongue machining from this side. It would have to drill the screw holes right through, or the shelf holes. Okay. There is still also the option for single line toolpath for tongue. If we minimize that, we have include tongue, single line toolpath. What this is going to do, and I have another picture for this, somewhere here. That's it there. So that's our single line toolpath. What it's going to do is run the tool right around the edge of your part, but at a reduced height. So when it does the tongue, it just removes the material above the top of it. Obviously, whether you're doing it single line or a rectangle toolpath for your tongues, they need to be the exact same tool diameter, or they need to be the correct tool diameter, I should say. If they're not, if your tool in the machine doesn't match what EasyNest and CabMaster thinks the tool does, you'll end up with a little step. It'll either go out if your tool's too narrow, or it will go in if your tool is larger than what CabMaster and EasyNest think it is. So that's why it's absolutely vital to have your tool diameters set up, and that's why we have these options here. Of course, changing the depth of your groove will adjust the length of the tongue. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting because the terminology isn't the same for both. Somewhere here, I also have there we go, that picture there. So the length of the tongue is equivalent to the depth of the groove. So if we go back here, our length of the tongue is equivalent to the depth of the groove. So we're undersizing the length of our tongue by 1mm. So if that's 9mm, the length of our tongue would be 8mm. So we'd have 9mm here, 8mm there. Now thickness is the width. If you've got a rectangular toolpath, you can undersize the thickness of that as well. If the groove width is 8mm, it's undersized by 0.3. So if that's 8, this is undersized by 0.3, so this would be 7.7mm thickness. The next we have length undersize. Now this is length undersize of the Sorry, this is width undersize of the tongue, not length undersize of the groove. And this is specifically where the terminology gets a little bit confusing, but hopefully I can explain it. Oh, there, that's it there. So we go back to CabMaster. That width value of 20 mil there is double that width. So you've got 10 mil there, and then you'd have 10 mil here. Now this distance from the edge of your part to the start of the tongue, I have actually made this picture wrong. Sorry, it's to the start of the tongue, not to the start of the groove. Can be set up in universals. It's set up there. So by default, it would be a percentage. For this instance, I set it as 20 mil. And then for your standard carcasses, you can determine at each edge, whether it's back, top, bottom, rail. You can have specific settings. So at the back of your bottom, there is no recess. So the groove runs right to the back of the part. A setting for just about all of those. You can see I've ticked that one on. I'll give an example of that now. So if we open that up, I might even expand that, drag that across, zoom in. So you can see the tongue comes out and then it goes all the way to the back. Now, of course, you can do that with the backs. I don't have that set up here. That is also a default with Rails. And we'll shrink that back down. Okay, sorry, bear with me a second. Okay, so for backs in a standard cabinet, the machine faced needs to be set as back. And you do that in drawing properties. And then we go to machine general and we do that to face. You see there, I have it as back. If I set it to inside, machines from the inside face of the back, which means that the tongue would be on the back of the carcass, not set in, so it won't apply it. If you do want that specific setup, you have to do that with a universal. And I can show you that here. If I zoom in, so that grey line there, or that black line I should say, is the tongue on the back of the carcass, not set inwards. If I go to machining, and then I go to end left, not div doors, you can see how it puts the groove on the back of the carcass. So in this case, you can see, you can look at this end and you can tell where your machine faces are. So the machine face for the back is from the inside. For the bottom, it's going to be up from underneath. And then from the rail, the machine face is going to be the top of the rail. That is a very brief description of universals. I do have possibly another one there. That is when it's not single line toolpath for your tongues. Again, like the groove, it's just going to stay inside that box at a depth that is less than the border. And that is calculated off the depth So off the width of the groove, not its separate value. Just leave that one there for a second. So again, so the length of the tongue is the depth of the groove, the thickness of the tongue is the width of the groove, and then the width of the tongue in drawing properties is the gap either side between the inside edge of the tongue and the outside edge of the groove. There is also option to go back to drawing properties, and I go back to tongue settings. If I untick single line toolpath, there is the option for overlap. Now, overlap, again, find my handy little picture. There it is. Overlap is how much further out the actual toolpath for the tongue extends past the tongue. And then the diameter of the tool is going to determine the width. So that's the general premise of tongue and groove. You can do draws. There are specific setup for draws. If you need help with setting up tongue and groove for draws, contact support and we will help you with that. The next thing I want to talk about is shadow rails. So we're going to move away from tongue and groove completely and look at shadow rails. So shadow rails are finger pulls, are recess rails. I'm sure there's other names, but they're all the same thing, essentially. To turn shadow rails on in the drawing properties, we go to drawing properties, shadow rails, include, and then we can tick them on for floor, just doors, or also include drawers. Top drawer only is what it states, top drawer only. You can also turn them on for tools. If you don't want the physical rail in there and you want to add in your own rails or machine your own rails, you can untick, or tick I should say, remove the physical rails for top rails and between rails. Between rails obviously being the rails between drawers in a drawer bank. So let's have a look at the settings. Shadow rails calculate by the overlap, not by the gap. So firstly, we have the height of the top rail. Of course, we have the orientation for your shadow rails there too. The height of our top rail, and then the height of our shadow rails that are between our drawers. Now that setback distance is from the front of the carcass to the front of the shadow rail panel, not the back of the shadow rail panel. As in, if I set that to, let's make it something crazy. Let's go 70 mil. Go apply, okay. We can see it there. If I go to, I'll just zoom in, might be easier. Our setback is the distance from the front of our carcass to the front of our shadow rail panel, not the back of it. What this means is it allows us to put a panel in there so you can have an L-shaped rail. I'll get to that in a minute. Of course, we can change the material of our shadow rail panel. I'm going to set that back to 20 for now. Apply. Now I'm going to talk about positioning. So top of door, top drawer. This row here, that positioning is the overlap of the door over the shadow rail. So that value of 25 there is from there to the top of our door. It's not the gap, it's the overlap. We do have a fantastic knowledge base article on this. I've downloaded it for easy reference, but I will show you here. We'll scroll down a bit. So as you can see there, the top of drawer is on the top. It's only for the top of doors and the top drawer in a drawer bank. Then of course you've got top of lower drawers is for all your other drawers in the drawer bank. Bottom of individual drawers, again, it's overlap from the top of the shadow rail to the bottom of the drawer front. And then again, same for bottom of the drawer bank or door. I'll minimize that back out the way and close that. Back to drawing properties. Fixing rails. So adding a fixing rail will put a rail behind the top shadow rail panel. So this here, there's our fixing rail. I know it's a bit hard to see. Zoom out a bit, might make it a bit easier. That's our fixing rail there. That's our regular carcass rail. You can then also add fixing rails for between drawer banks. That's our fixing rail there. I'll go back to drawing properties. Scroll down. And I have that option ticked on. You can, short of shadow rail, this is how much shorter in height you want the fixing rail to be. So in this case, our height is 60 mil. So our fixing rail is going to be 5 mil less, so it's going to be 55. With between drawers, it's 5 mil off the top of the rail and 5 mil off the bottom of the rail. So a fixing rail would be 50 mil. So this add shadow rail lip within a setback gap, that is where we add our L-shaped panel in the front. You can see if I tick that off, that will go away. And there it's gone. We're now going to look at the machining for shadow rails. So it's currently set on notch. Now notch is the little square that's in the back of fixing rails, or in the back of shadow rail cutouts in your ends to allow for the diameter of the tool. So that's where the tool goes back in and then comes back out. And that way you can still have your square fixing rail butted straight into the corner. We've discussed the tooling and export of this in our previous webinar, and that should be up on our YouTube now, which you can certainly go and watch after this. And that will cover why you need the tool to be less than the diameter around notch and how you set all that up. Basically, the notch needs to be wider than the diameter of the tool. Radius. So clicking radius will make the entire cutout in the end deeper to account for the radius of the tool. So if you've got a 10mm tool, so that's a 5mm radius, and your cutout in the corner, if I close that, and your cutout in your end was, say, 20mm deep, it would actually come out at 25mm there, because it's accounting for the radius of the tool. You can, of course, have them both unticked, and then all you're going to get is a 18mm thick or 18mm deep cutout. You can also oversize the width of the cutout and the height of the cutout in the end. So because we've got a 60mm high, it will actually cut that height in the end of our carcass, which if I go to machining, go to end left, it would make that cutout 61mm. Again, having the 1mm oversize in width means that if everything is up to that point is calculated to be, say, 30mm deep, it would cut out at 31mm in from the edge or front edge of our carcass. There is also an option to leave the cutouts attached as press out. So what this will do is it will send out the cutout as a separate layer. If we untick that, it will add it to the border. So then the tool will just come around rather than having a separate tool path that comes and cuts it out. Where that's an advantage is that the little block that's in the middle of that cutout will not get sucked up by the vacuum or by the extractors and go through your extractor blades. It may also be handy for edging, where you edge your ends face down and then the roller doesn't drop in to the cutouts. And of course, we have the same options there for our fixing rails. Now, to follow on from shadow rails, I'm going to talk about doors, or the doors tab. This is angled doors, angled door backs, shark nose. I can't think of other names for them. V-edge. I'm sure there's other names. They're all, again, the same thing here. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a V while I'm on that subject. All it does is produce a layer. You can apply any tool you want to do it. So if you wanted a radiused back edge on your door for your finger pull, you could use a bullnose and you'd end up with a rounded edge rather than a sharp edge. The big thing about this is angle doors, you can use them without having your shadow rails on. So if you just want angled door backs without shadow rails, certainly an option. Here I've set just for a floor, so it's the top edge of our door, and then the edge that would be where our handle is, or opposite our hinge side. Apply, okay. If I go back to, let's go to 3D hidden. As you can see, it will display as a 45-degree V, meaning that that is the tool that you're choosing or how it's going to be set up. With machining for these, primary tool, so the depth as door less is how far short of the face you want the shark nose or the tool to start. So even though it doesn't show it here, what I've asked for in machining, if I can zoom in enough and get a good angle, is that there'll be a 10 mil of flat spot, and then we would have the shark nose. Now there's also an option for a secondary tool, which you can turn on. Now the offset from the edge for the primary tool is inwards. If I go to outdoor, and I'll go view machining, and I'll show you our door one right. So this line here, that's the toolpath for our primary tool. As you can see, it's offset 10 mil down. You can see the depth there is 8 mil because I've got the primary tool set as 10, so it's only going into the board 8 mil because it's 18 mil board. The secondary tool, its offset goes outwards. And as you can see, the depth is 18 because I don't have any depth as door less value in there. Where you would use this, I'm not sure. Perhaps you want a stepped profile. You might have a 45-degree cutter, and then you want it to come back on a square edge. Totally thinking outside the box, what can I do with this? How can I do it? You can move these around, set your machining, change the tools to achieve the profile that you're after. So I think I've reasonably covered all of those. Again, if there's any machining that isn't exporting, say you want to set up tongue and groove or shadow rails or shark nose, and you have exported it and it's not showing an easy nest, first thing I recommend doing is going and watching our video on exporting layers from CabMaster Easy Nest. And then if you're still having issues, contact support and we can help you with that. All these pictures here, I am just going to tidy up a little bit. These will go into an article on the knowledge base to make that a bit easier for all of you to access. And you can't use a little bit of confusion there. So if you want a profile door through Doormaster LT, obviously your shark nose is on the back of the door, you're machining the front of the door. Unless you have 6-face machining set up, it won't machine both. It will still display both, but it won't be able to machine both. 6-face, again, it's the same for tongue groove. You can't machine, say, again, I keep going to 13 mil deep shelf holes from one side and then have the tongue machined from the other. Were there any questions on that? Actually, what I might do while we're talking about all this, it vaguely works with shadow rails. It's a little bit different. I'm going to change the label construction, cabinet machining, untick default. I'm going to go the screw. We will get rid of our shadow rail. And then I will remove the angled door back. So it's just a regular door again. I'm going to go to drawing properties, go to door handles, and show you that we can do finger pull rail. There, that's already set up. So if I go back to hardware, door handles, yeah, just double checking, that's good. So I should be able to untick remove handles. And then we can also display C-section rails, and of course it will allow for that in the height of the door. So that is an option too. You can of course use this handle profile when shadow rails is turned on. It doesn't look the best, but if that's a direction you want to go down, you can certainly do that. Do we have a setup for lip pull handles that go on top of doors? Currently not displayable. We have dabbled with custom tables that will do the machining for you. Obviously, if you're edging it, then you've got to somehow run that through the edger. If you need any support on lip pull handles, just contact support. Any question, and then we can go more in depth to that, because that's less of a shadow rail question and more a general. Again, this article is on our knowledge base. I might even, if we can, bring that up. CabMaster Software. Should probably do it on a different one that won't lock me in. Start. Bear with me a second. Master. There's our website there. So to access our knowledge base, go to our website, support, help center. I'm going to type in here shadow rails. And I'm going to go to shadow rails, drawing properties explained. And that's where you can find that specific document that just covers everything we've discussed. So we can also access that if we go to back to our CabMaster library help topics. That takes you directly there. That's probably a bit easier. What I will also do is go to there, see. Of course, all these webinars get uploaded to YouTube. There's all our previous ones. If you haven't seen these, I do recommend going back and watching them. There will be something in there that you'll learn from it that you probably didn't know before. Nothing in there is particularly super in detail. It's all general. If there's anything that these videos don't cover, please give us a call at support or send us an email. Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you for attending our webinar on tongue groove, shadow rail, and shark nose or angled doorbacks. We don't have any more questions there. We haven't confirmed what next week's webinar will be on yet, but that will be coming out in an email in the following days. I hope you all have a good weekend.